Welcome very, very much to ACAP, and this is the 28th of January, and the year is 2013, and we had asked our executive director to come and talk to us about the implications of the many transformations that are taking place at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, the Manhattan Public Access Facility, but he's really overworked because there's so much going on with that whole moving everything into high definition. And so in the end, we decided, why don't we have a round-robin discussion with people who might come out. It happens to be one of the nastiest nights ever, so I'm not sure if more people are going to come or not. The weather is very foul. But we have a number of people here, and we're going to talk about things, as I had suggested in the email I sent out, in a comprehensive way of thinking, perhaps rather than having an individual speaker who will focus on one of the many issues that are confronting the human condition, which seems to be mostly what we get. People have a focus on either one group or one nation or one subject area in terms of idea. But we have people here, all of whom have a comprehensive understanding. History Channel, and it was incredibly interesting. It was called The History of the World in 2 hours. And they had these really beautiful graphics that begins with the Big Bang, string theory, the physics of the universe, and comes forward right through the whole human condition of history and everything of that sort. And it was really good because it was taking a very comprehensive overview of the whole Megillah, you might say, in terms of the evolution of this universe and the evolutionary process and the Homo sapiens species. And most all of what we see is something that is politically oriented toward one particular subject, more or less. But in any event, with that idea in mind, I'm happy to welcome you all on the stream. And Humphrey's our dog, has taken over the seat of the king's chair here, and the cat is joining. And why don't we go around and introduce yourselves, okay, who you are in there, and then we'll get into a discussion about things, if we can, in a very comprehensive context. And I'm happy, okay? So Allison, maybe you could just introduce yourself, and then you, and then we'll get into a conversation round robin about the contemporary human condition within a very large context of understanding that we are able to encompass that discussion in.
Well, I'm Allison.
Speak up if you can for the mic, okay?
I'm Allison Van David, and I'm here in the role of bystander and learner and student. But I come from a bent toward humanism. Have for many years been involved in civil rights issues and liberal religion, and so that's where I come from. I'm interested in, I know a number of you, and interested in the work you're doing.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Radin, and I'm a fellow producer at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and I have a show called Crooked Doctors. And comprehensively, it's interesting that you say that, because I was looking for the brief summary statement of my experience. And so I'm involved in human rights issues, and I think what we see sort of in America, we had this discussion, you see society starting to unravel, and that's of great concern. So I'm trying to address some social justice issues that are not just unique to me and not just unique to groups, but I can demonstrate discriminatory behavior on a institutional scale. In fact, I have a PhD project that I'm working on. I'm writing, there was a book that came out in 2006 called The Israeli Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. And I'm writing the natural sequel, which is The Israeli Lobby and U.S. Domestic Policy, which makes a lot of people very unhappy. So, well, more than unhappy, they don't like it, so I'm being persecuted for it.
Yeah.
But but a while back, I talked to one of the authors of The Israeli Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. I was trying to get an appointment. He's a Harvard professor, and I spoke to him briefly, and I was trying to get an appointment to talk to him, and then I was maliciously prosecuted and drop-kicked into prison to silence me.
You had to do time.
I did 11 months at Rikers Island.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm appealing. Yeah.
You could get a book or two out of that, couldn't you?
You could get a whole lot out of that. Yeah. And so, I'm going to send Allison actually a brief. I'm in federal court right now, suing the doctors at Rikers Island for trying to stigmatize me.
Yeah, we wrote some supporting things for you.
Yeah.
And you're pretty familiar with the court system and the legal justice.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased to announce that I survived the motion to dismiss, and I forced the New York City Law Department and attorney to talk to me. And not only did they try to stigmatize me, to silence me as mentally ill when I'm not, but they had the temerity to bill Medicaid for it. So that's Medicaid fraud. So, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's hard to know where to look for malfunction because there's so much of it in the societal order.
My problem is that I'm being persecuted through life by people who want to silence me, but, so we're trying to address in a more comprehensive way corruption, and one of our solutions was we need an anti-corruption task force, we need to be on the task force, we need, a hotline to the governor, so when we get jerked around, we can have an authority who will throw his weight around, figuratively, not literally.
I was at a thing up in, I mean, pitch in, we can all pitch in there. I was up at a thing at the Harlem Library, 124, with Alton Maddox. I don't know if you know Alton. He's a real, confrontational kind of guy. And there was a whole lot of things. We're going to do a program with the guy who was the prison guard at Rikers.
Oh.
And he's changing what he's doing. He's calling the attention to stop and frisk and all these other things that have a racial overtone.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's part of the contextual. Okay, well listen, how about you? We have a young man here in from Atlanta and everything, or from Brooklyn. Introduce yourself and spell out your situation, if you would.
To the camera?
Yeah, no, to the camera, to us. Just don't pay attention. Just talk. And the camera will pick you up.
My name is Bakari Pace.
Try to speak up as loud as you can.
Sure. My name is Bakari Pace. I'm an undergraduate at Morehouse College and a member of a social sustainability advocacy organization called the Zeitgeist Movement.
Amen.
And it follows the same trend as some of the earlier people, such as Frederick Soddy, Howard Scott, who was the founder of Technocracy, and leading into more contemporary figures like Buckminster Fuller, Jacques Fresco, and now Peter Joseph, and this idea that the world should be sustainable and that we should that social behaviors, economic behaviors, sociological behaviors, and psychological behaviors need to be adjusted to these principles of sustainability that we identify in our materials. My work right now is I work as an author of my book right now, which is going to be completed by the end of this year, called Enough for All Forever.
Enough for All Forever. I love the title.
Thank you. And that's a book that I'm completing with a team of researchers right now, people who span from University of Toronto, universities in Canada, universities in California, and my own personal university, Morehouse College. So that's the work that I do. That's my goal in life really is just to see this. It's not necessarily to see this in my lifetime. I don't expect that, but I do expect to. I guess in the words of Tupac Shakur when he spoke, say he didn't expect necessarily to see change happen in his lifetime, but he expected to spark the brain of the people who would hear his words past his life, and would eventually be the people who change the world.
So you would like to change the world, and you have some ideas on how that might be achieved. Would you consider yourself an idealist, or you're realistically based, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say, I'd use your word, a comprehensivist. I look at the word.
It's a proud word. It should be used more and more in academia because it's all specialized. All the disciplines are so broken up. It's like divide and conquer the intellectual enterprise. It seems, particularly galloped in that direction.
That's one of the reasons why when I was at Morehouse I decided to study philosophy. Philosophy was the beginning of the knowledge. And all sciences initially were called philosophies, and then it developed from there. So I figured if I could go closer to the source of where knowledge developed. So for instance, like Descartes was not merely a philosopher. He's the person who created the Cartesian way of thinking. In fact, it's the linear way, the X, Y, Z's, that all came out of Descartes' thinking, and that built upon these different philosophies of mathematics. For instance, Galileo was a philosopher. All of these major scientific thinkers, we call them scientific thinkers, were initially philosophers. That's what they grounded in.
That's true, isn't it?
Yeah. So I figured that if I was going to study something, that was going to be as comprehensive as possible, I should focus on the schools thought that was the most comprehensive. And as a result of that, I've been introduced to, John Locke was not merely a philosopher, but he was an economist. Yeah. So when I learned John Locke, I'm not merely learning his thinkings on government, but I'm also learning about his theories of government.
And natural law.
And economics and all these different factors that, really brought into who he was and brought into, and really set the train for the world that we live in today. When you look back into the theories of economics, you look back into the theories of philosophy of democracy. Yeah, a lot of American philosophers who ended up penning the Constitution, a lot of the philosophers who ended up penning the free market capitalist system structure that we live in today, did derive a lot of their concepts from John Locke and earlier philosophers. So by studying philosophy, you get a broader way to understand the context in which the world should live.
You're also familiar with zeitgeist.
Yes,
I think it might be worth mentioning that's a major movement in terms of having a very comprehensive overview. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about that, because you're pretty deep in that zeitgeist movement and the people that are behind it.
The zeitgeist movement was founded in 2008 by a Brooklyn native named Peter Joseph. He was a stock trader, equities trader, and one day he decided that he didn't like doing that anymore. He felt that what he was doing was pointless, I guess is the word that he took for it. And he created a series of videos, one called Zeitgeist, the second called Zeitgeist Addendum, the third called Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which was released in 2011. And Zeitgeist Moving Forward ended up getting, he released all of these films for free online. And Zeitgeist Moving Forward received something like 22 million views over the course of a year.
Yeah.
And through that, at the last count, we had about 1,100 chapters in 70 countries.
Really? 1,100? That's a lot.
Membership in 2009 was something like 500,000 members. But that wasn't out, like I said, that was in 2009. That was before we started counting the new members who constantly, and in fact, now that the film has reached a broader audience through Netflix, and because it's no longer merely on YouTube, it's accessible on Netflix, my email has been blowing up with more people who are in the Georgia area who've watched the film as a result of watching it on Netflix and reaching out to me saying, hey, I want to get to know more about this and more about this, more about this. And that's really how I got involved with this comprehensive perspective, which was watching this film, which opened my eyes to the idea that there is a symbiotic, emergent perspective that's really lost in the world, really, about the way the society operates. And if you don't realize that, your integrity, in the words of Peter Joseph, your integrity is really only as safe and secure as the integrity of the entire species, not just the species, but the world itself. And your integrity is fundamentally tied to that integrity. Right. And to lock into any type of knowledge frame that blocks you from recognizing that symbiosis. And also by allowing yourself to get locked into any knowledge frames that make you forget how knowledge emerges over time. That it's not a stagnant position. Knowledge is constantly moving forward. If you get locked in that framework, then you have to make sure that you find ways to get out of that framework. And that's what Zeitgeist Addendum did for me.
Yeah, and they conflate with Fuller. The Buckminster Fuller is another major comprehensive. I don't know who the real comprehensivists are, or how many of them there are. It's almost all specialized on one particular subject area, or to liberate one group of humanity or the animals. But comprehensive, that takes in the universe and the Big Bang and the physics and all the disciplines and everything. And it's thought of as ipso facto absurd to think that anyone can be that, because you'd be seen only as a jack of all trades, master of none. You're not really serious unless you get really specialized in one particular field. And that's the trend, and you've been able to buck that trend.
One of the fascinating
Congratulations. I think yours is the future of real serious things.
One of the fascinating things about Fuller really is you can just go to his Wikipedia page, and when people try to encapsulate him into a single topic, and you end up having like 2 paragraphs of Mr. Fuller was philosopher, social thinker, designer,
Yeah.
engineer.
Yeah.
It's as if they want to buck that concept of saying we're going to figure out what hole can we put this guy in, or we're going to choose as many holes as possible if we can.
You may be heading for Harvard. Possibly you would like to do that. I think it's worthy of saying and everything. He was Fuller,
Fuller.
He got thrown out
twice.
for hijinks when he was a young man. Did you know that?
Twice.
He took a whole theater troupe and took all the money rather than paying the tuition, took them out to a big ball or something. Hijinks. Young men usually have hijinks. But when they came time to give him the honorary degree, they didn't know what the hell to give it to him. They couldn't know because he was everywhere. And so they finally ended up giving it to him in poetics, which is, I guess, one way. But enough. And welcome, and I applaud you in the direction you're taking and everything of that sort.
Thank you.
Okay, how about you, Mr. Joseph?
Well, my name is Joe Ben David. And,
Speak up as much as you can, Joe, for the camera.
My name is
There you go!
Joe Ben David, and I am a minister emeritus of the Czech Unitarian Association. I am also the founder and senior minister of the Church of Humanism. It's a theological seminary, and its division, the Humanist Foundation. Now, my life reaches back to the time of the Nazis.
Wow.
And my first appearance at a public forum, was in a rally against Nazism and fascism, where I was speaking about the necessity to create a huge public relations campaign to counteract Nazi propaganda.
Bravo!
Where in the United States?
This is when I was about 16 or 17 years
Prague.
old.
That was in Prague.
Prague.
That
That was
all
in
in
Prague.
Prague.
And he was just running a couple
Yeah.
steps ahead of the
What year
Nazi
was that?
program.
1936 or 37. Yeah.
So the question is, why didn't they kill you? 'Cause
They
that's what
couldn't catch him.
Because that's what they usually do.
No, he escaped in a thing worthy
Right.
of a film on a ship.
Then I was a-
moments
Then I was
before the
trained
Nazis.
as a chemist by my father, who had a chemical factory and wanted me to be able to live wherever I will be by having formulas, his secret formulas, for about 20 different kind of products. Inks and rollers for printers, all kinds of things. Then I was a fighter for justice. That was like a big thing.
Yes.
Justice for the Palestinian people against the Israeli takeover of their land. Now that was a big thing, and I was connected with some really important people in Israel who were more or less in the same
Wavelength.
yeah. Then I was a public health officer, and I was
Where?
Where was
in
that?
Jerusalem. I was the title was the district inspector for health and industries, and eventually it was the Department of Health, where I was the chief inspector.
You were associated with Martin Buber,
Well, that was another thing.
the giant,
Yeah, but
the
it-
giant philosopher.
In the philosophy and psychology, I brought Eric Fromm's ideas
Eric Fromm.
already, I don't know when it was, when I was still in Israel, when the Israelis were just purely, war-oriented and business-oriented. So I introduced the psychology of Eric Fromm in the framework of an organization that I started and was president of, called Israel Cultural Society. And it was diametrically opposed to the Israeli culture that was anti-Palestinians. So that was that. And then I was in the United States, where I started the American Friends of Ihud, which was Martin Buber's organization, and I was speaking in all kinds of places, colleges, universities, until people said, why didn't Hitler kill you? Yeah.
He tried.
Well, then,
Did he really try?
then, not me, but he killed my mother. Yeah.
You were just one step ahead of the
Yeah, well,
Gestapo
I
getting
just
out.
escaped with
It was
the-
worthy. It's worthy of the
I
most
escaped
exciting
with the
adventure
last,
story.
with the last
Escape from
transport of
Prague.
people. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and then other things. Till this day, I was fighting the smoking addiction by creating a publication, the report on smoking and health, which brought to the consciousness of the American people the fact that 400,000 people die prematurely in the United States on account of smoking.
Oh,
I was the one who, that was not known before, statistically.
Before that was, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and eventually I started to fight evil religion. There's good religion and evil religion. Most religion completely perverted the ideas and efforts of their founders and turned into the opposite. So, for example, Muhammad was a fighter against idolatry, but the Muslims in general believe in Allah as an idol and worship Allah, which is not what Muhammad wanted. He wanted Allah in the humanist sense, and in the humanist sense, Allah means up, transcending the lower stages of human nature and nature in general, and elevated to an enlightened and creative state of existence. And now I am a theologian, purely a theologian, and my main effort on the basis of an essay which I wrote, took me 10 years to write it, and it was based on about 100 books and thousands of notes, filtered down to 16 pages.
16?
16. So I have it now, and my big fight now is to introduce a God concept where God is not the piece of shit which he is for most religions, but where God is the highest good, and a phenomenon that has to do with the creative process in nature and based on the idea of ideal reality. And that's what I'm doing.
We're coming to that time, maybe. Okay, thanks. Rosalie, talk to the camera hard as you can, loud as you can, please, okay?
Hi, I'm Rosalie Grable, and my claim to fame, which is no fame at all, is I discovered that they didn't really use planes on 9/11, that there was no airplane in the first hit footage at all. There's a drone. And that the second hit was cartoons, and not very good cartoons. And that these cartoons were created in a PAL format, which is European and Israeli. And they fooled us really good. I mean, people are completely willing to believe this and that about the government, but since they saw with their own eyes on television planes hitting buildings, they believe in that. And that belief led to the entire terrorist problems that we have now, which are, in fact, when they had that recent killing of a bunch of people at a refinery, and they came in and they killed terrorists. 3 of them were Westerners, and this should give somebody a hint, but of course they're beyond catching hints. And my other claim to fame is I invented my own religion, so I'm a theologian too.
Okay.
I hail Eris, the goddess of chaos, equally in triumph and despair.
The goddess of chaos. Not
Yes.
Mendelbrot, maybe.
Very much.
Below
It
Mendelbrot.
has nothing to do with the American idea of chaos as, you know, everything's falling apart badly.
Yeah.
Um,
Fractal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the fractal nature of reality. And it, since Eris is imaginary, she has imaginary tattooed on her chest, and female is in opposition to all of these male-dominated god forms that are out to make sure nobody has any fun. Yeah, we have 3
Stand
commandments.
out fun, huh?
Yeah, because, whoops, 10 was too many. It's a refusal to lie, cheat, or steal. Anything else is your own business and purely a matter of taste.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, okay, Margaret, take it away. Speak up. You have a low voice usually. Right?
Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome. My name is Margaret Borges. And where do I begin? A simple woman, American, traveled all over the world. I started out as an adventurous after school, during school, and explored as many regions as I possibly could. Now, everything I have seen is all been destroyed by wars, whether it's in Asia, Africa, Europe, South America. But my love of the world, its cultures, its diversity, the curiosity, the humanism, the animals, led me to seek a career with the United Nations, which I did, and it was short-lived. And then, unfortunately, the powers that be drew me back into my family's business, which was law and real estate. And so, in some way, shape, or form, I've been involved in buying, selling, building, fighting in courts, developing land, renovations, remodelings, buy, sell, whatever. And it gave me a good profit. And to actualize building and to take care in what you do, environmentally, in terms of the type of structure you build, is something that I absolutely enjoy. Fortunately, it's not done too much. Mostly the profits are there. But unfortunately, I've had a very long, stale period. And I have found myself in the New York Supreme Court since 1995, fighting case after case in divorce court. And I have had an education on just the shams at the courts, the lawyers, and everybody else who's involved in our legal system, to the point where I have concluded that it's a sham. And justice is something that is not truly seen very often.
It can be bought and sold.
It can be definitely bought and sold, put off, and relegated to the basement of lost records. And people can be lost in the system. They can be lost in jails. Their files can be lost. They can be accused of things which they are not even near, and be thrown in jail for observation. And now, with the Patriot Act, the habeas corpus has been thrown out the window, We're not in wartime. This is not a war situation. This is a sham by drone planes and a very, very, very ugly situation that I find this country in. And it's just not wars overseas that we partake in. It's the war inside our own cities, our own states. And having had to fight it and asking myself, what am I doing? Another form, another motion, another delay, no decisions, no justice? When does it stop? And I find that it just doesn't stop until you make it stop. You either cease and desist, you walk away, or you spend the rest of your life fighting for what you consider to be just. And so I find myself in that particular moment. But because I have people like you who come to my home, I can listen about Allah and ascending to a higher plane. And boy, I love the Supreme Court of New York State to go to Allah and find itself into a higher mode. It's a shame, to tell you the truth. Not just because of my own cases, but what I see. And just one little point in my scenario is that I found that I have a loan on my piece of property. Now, my particular bank went down in flames in September 2008. It was taken over by Chase. Now, Chase's lawyers informed me that I will be paying Chase now for my monthly payment. I said, okay. Oh, about a year later, unbeknown to me, after paying Chase for a year, they write to me, the lawyers, and say, we are in charge of going through the files for the people that we assumed their loans from your prior bank. It seems to me we're missing a few documents in your file. In fact, we're missing your entire file. Oh, I says to myself, that means I don't have a loan. And so now I'm going about, and then the bank tried to foreclose on me. And I said, show me that I owe you. They haven't gone. I have not paid them in 3 years. They have done nothing.
And there's a whole lot of those things lost in the shuffle of 2008.
And when I started investigating the whole foreclosure scam, I realized that, you have robo-signers and foreclosures. People were so scared, so ignorant, that they just folded. They didn't have particularly a job or much money. They're behind in their payments. They folded without even knowing their rights. Now, you can fight them when you figure out that they did it illegally. But you're out of a house, your life has been disrupted, it will take you years to get back into the house, if there's any house left standing. You have people that are robbing it, looting it, tearing out copper wiring to sell it. So I have seen, because of my own situation, expanding my legal cases into something that is now affecting the whole world.
The whole finance.
The whole finance world. We call them in the Wall Street Journal the pigs of Europe. We all know who the pigs are of Europe. The ones that bought securitized mortgages from America as bonds, invested their country's taxpayers' money for high-yielding, secured investments on our mortgages.
It was a fraud.
Total fraud.
It was a fraud.
So
it
now,
has implications forward going through here.
so now you have what we in America call the pigs, because they borrowed too much when they shouldn't have.
No, we sold them a fraud.
Exactly. They're trying to say that they wanted to buy it. So you have the pigs: Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain.
So it's blame the victim. People who got duped by the fraud and bought into it now will attack the, it's a standard strategy.
Exactly.
Attack the
It's
victim.
been around for a long time.
Attack the victim eventually.
Generally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's your greed. If you hadn't bought in, if you weren't so easily duped, you know, it's all your fault. It's all your fault.
Exactly.
Well, we didn't market a fraud. We marketed a fraud.
Yes, and subprime mortgages, oh, sure, you can buy that overpriced house for a small amount of interest. And then in that fraud, you had somebody like AIG who insured the securitized.
Well, you know how the fraud worked, right? Can I borrow your pen? This is how the fraud worked. It's really simple. Somebody explained it to me. Do you have another pen? Does anybody else have another pen? Here, I'll show
You need 2 pens?
Yeah, I just need a collection of stuff. Here's how the fraud worked. It's very simple.
Well,
Okay,
Go
it goes
for it,
like
Lisa.
this. This is like really simple. Somebody explained it to me, so it's really real simple to understand. What you got is all these people borrowed money, and they got a 90% chance of not paying the money back. And then they took one person who had a 97% chance of not paying the money back. And they bundled them all together, and then they covered it up and said, let me borrow this. So they took these people who have a 90% chance of not paying the money back. And this person has a 97% chance of not paying the money back. So they bundled it all together and said, see, it's low risk, and they covered all this up and saying, now it's got a AAA bond rating.
yeah, who gave them that?
Well, that's why it's the fraud. Because what they're trying to do is say, relative to this group, there's no risk here, right? But, you know, at step one, none of these people are going to pay the money back. So when you take this person who has a 97% chance of not paying the money back and compare it with, you know, these people will have a 90% chance of not paying the money back. None of these people are going to pay the money back. But they didn't do this with outside checks. All they did was said, relative to each other, this is safe to buy because it's only this one person that's not going to pay the money back. But all these people have very high risks of not paying the money back, but they pretended it was a low risk because in this group, you only had one person with a very high risk of not paying the money back relative to these people. Do you see how the fraud worked? This is fraud.
Tell you what I'm going to sell you.
This is fraud. And then they made it hard for people to understand because they said, well, it's derivatives.
Derivatives are new.
It's garbage. They just invented this techno-schmechno language so that we'd all feel stupid. And they do this all the time in legalese. They do this all the time in medicine. All the time. You go to a dermatologist and you have a little rash. Oh, well, you know, you have dermatitis. No kidding. They're just using language. What's dermatitis? You have sick skin? Well, you knew that before you came in, right? So all they did was to invent something to fool people and then make you feel stupid. But if you use basic common sense, none of these people are going to pay the money back. So this isn't a very secure bundling.
They were toxic, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't a very secure bundling. They sold this to all the pigs of Europe.
On the bond market.
Yeah, they sold this saying, look how secure it is. Out of this, all these people who borrowed money, there's only one person who won't pay the money back, relatively speaking. Okay, that's the fraud. Okay? And they use techno-schmechno language all the time. In fact, Greenspan used to say, he would come in and talk to Congress. He would deliberately speak in language that people wouldn't understand. So they would think, oh my gosh, we have to hire this guy to interpret for us because it's so technical. You know, and that's how you would make work for yourself, right? You use language against people. I see people with basic common sense in court all the time who are intimidated by the court system, intimidated by the language, and I'm like, look, just use basic common sense. You know, these people are trying to fool you. They do this in engineering all the time. I have friends who are engineers, and engineers will talk in this techno-schmechno language to try to fool you. You have basic common sense. You know that going up a hill is harder than coming down a hill. I mean, you could just kind of sort of figure things out. You know, you're not stupid, but you have to hire this specialist to translate to you, and then it's just a fraud. So this is how we got into, this is the substandard mark. This is the fraud that was used to do, I'm losing my thing here.
And Lydia, when you combine that
and then
with
that
something
has
called...
larger implications in terms of a comprehensive understanding of the human condition. Because it involves everywhere.
Yeah, so basically you just got a bunch of crooks right?
Well,
But now, for
These are
women
just
that
crooks, and then we exported our risk. What we sold it here, we created the fraud, and then the banks are not stupid. They're like, oh, you know something, this whole thing's going to go bad because it's a ticking time bomb, right?
No, but look how they protected themselves.
They sold the risk.
No, something different. The most powerful thing in the world is information,
Yeah,
falsely or rightly. But
yeah.
in 1995, under Clinton, they got rid of the
Glass-Steagall.
Steagall Act. But also they passed something called
99.
the Mortgage Electronic Registration Service,
Right,
MERS they call it.
right.
Now MERS was to take over the written document of a deed, a trust.
They were greasing the wheels to make the
No,
fraud
no.
happen quicker.
No.
Cyber coming.
The point being that anytime you had a transfer of property, be it the loan or a deed or whatever it was, always had to be hand-delivered to the county clerk for registration. So you had hard copy. There's massive amounts of books that have the records. And you can go to the computer and look at all the transfer of a piece of property. However, in '95, because they didn't want to, they figured a way how they could electronically transfer properties and not have to do that hard paper as it had been traditionally for, since forever. And they developed MERS. Now, the thing about MERS is that you have to be a member. Not everybody has access to what's going on in there. You can't use it without being a member, and you can't get information out of it without being a member. And the membership is closed to a very few people.
Thanks.
Those that control the transfer of deeds. And you can't find out what's happening.
Right, so that's, right.
So, for somebody to say this is a roto signing of a foreclosure, well, let me see the documents that back this up that says you have the ability to foreclose because you're a lender. You can't get the documents.
And then without transparency, that's how it's easier to perpetrate fraud and other
Exactly.
crimes. And
So-
that's what happens.
They arranged for the information to be totally contained and controlled,
Right.
and then they started the plot
Right.
for fraud.
Well, that's a
And they took
conspiracy.
it.
Yes, it is. It's
It's
a
a-
crime. It
It's
is.
a conspiracy
Absolutely.
thing, but it's getting away from the comprehensive thing, because it's been like that forever. it seems.
No, it hasn't.
Well, no, but it's just technologically augmented, but it's always been a few people who run things in the history of mankind anyway, or even evolution can be seen as survival of the fittest
Oh,
and
you
strongest.
watch those old westerns where somebody comes in and says, "This is my land, I've got a grub stake on it."
Yeah, the cowboys and the homesteaders. Okay, well, listen, let's keep moving. So talk a little bit about yourself, and then we got to get Josh over here to talk, and then we can just sort of pick up on some of the themes there. There seems to be a lot of, okay? Shoot.
Excuse me. I'm Jimmy Wadia, a Zoroastrian, originally from Bombay, India.
The only Zoroastrian in New York City, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I can die commune.
Perhaps the oldest religion there is.
Yeah, the foundation
Mithra.
stone for
Mithra, goes back to
Judeo-Christian religion. The duality of good versus evil and all that. It's good, but due to lack of intermarriage, anyone who marries outside the community is automatically disbarred, except for males. If they marry outside the community, their children can be Zoroastrian, but if a woman marries outside the community, her children cannot be Zoroastrians, which is exactly the opposite of Judaism, in which the woman is the one whose children are eligible for Jewishness and not the male's child. And I've been attending quite a few of these ACAP meetings, and the only claim to fame I have, and the only one that I need, that I'm a friend of Harold and Maggie.
Go on.
Since the last century.
And Brad Hall.
Through a mutual friend, called Brad Hall. I don't know how many of you know him. He's the one who introduced us. We still remember him every moment, every opportunity we get. May he rest in peace, and may he enjoy movies in heaven right now and listen to his music.
Yeah. Okay? Well, listen, what about Josh? Josh, come and sit here. I'll get on the camera.
Okay.
Come and talk to us, Josh.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not getting around. Okay. Josh Walensky, sit there and introduce yourself, and then we can just pick it up and maybe go some round robbery. Sit down and explain yourself.
I'm Josh Walensky, and I've been a volunteer at WBAI since 1966, and I had my adventures there. And then recently, in the last 10 years, I came to Manhattan Neighborhood Network, but it's always very interesting and sometimes tricky to talk about your early life. I was brought up by a matriarchal family, my mother and my aunts, and those were my first major lessons in women's liberation because they were very strong women. And originally they found a place in the Lady Garments Workers Union. And my aunt was a very fast piece worker, meaning she put together pieces of gowns very quickly and got paid for it. And my mother was slower but efficient. And then one day during World War II, they decided, since they were from Russia and they were literate in the Russian language, and they were really literate. In other words, they knew their Pushkin and their Dostoevsky and their Turgenev in Russian, including a lot of the other writers. They decided to take a job in Washington as a translator for a corporation that was owned, that had a charter here in the United States. You know, like TD Bank is really a Canadian corporation that has a charter in New York. And in World War II, there were corporations that were really owned by the Soviet Union that had charters in the United States. And they took a job in the Soviet Purchasing Commission. And we all went to Washington, and we had some very, very interesting experiences in Washington, because even liberated women had to struggle with the patriarchy. So the first week on the job, my mother and aunt, two gorgeous young women, threw a party at their apartment, and all the Russian generals came, all the Soviet generals, and one general was really nasty. He wanted to sleep with all the women. So the women got together and said, what do we do with this schmuck? And they decided they'll put him in a cab and send him home. So they did. The next day at work, they all got pink slips.
No, I'll be damned.
Anyway, this so-called schmuck who they put into the cab was the executive director of the Soviet Purchasing Commission that purchased non-strategic materials for the USSR. So, when they were fired, my aunt was a pessimist, and she said, well, you can't, whatever you said in 1942, you can't fight City Hall. But my mother said, no, that's wrong. I'm going to go to the Consulate General. And she told them the story, and they said, well, we believe your story, but you have to put it in writing. So she put it in writing, and they investigated. And since this man was a war hero, they sent him to the Russian-Soviet front to command the Russian troops. And they rehired my mother and my aunt and everyone else and gave them raises.
Wow.
Now, I don't know
Fairy tale.
if in those years, if the Russians were trying to make a point, but they were very, very fair and decent. They gave everyone good raises, good vacations. They were very respectful of women, and if you would go by my experiences in Washington, you would really believe that Joe Stalin and the Soviet Union were trying to build a great new egalitarian society.
I think a lot of Marxists
So
felt
anyway,
that way.
with such strong women, it took me quite a while to get from under their influence. In fact,
Still
I had
trying.
a therapist who told me one of the problems my mother was that she made me into a surrogate husband, a little husband, which she did. And she told me a lot of things, confided a lot of things in me, to me, that made it very difficult for me to really have a really serious relationship with women for quite a while. But, as Harold will tell you, now I have friends all over the place, you know.
Lady
And,
friends all over the place,
I was
an entourage, I mean.
I was a typical red diaper baby.
Hmm.
I belonged to the
They're
Young
like a left-wing
Socialist League
communist almost.
and the SDS. And as a matter of fact, I actually had a conversation with Eleanor Roosevelt, because when I joined Americans for Democratic Action, I believed I saw no reason why socialists cannot hang out with Max Lerner and Murray Kempton and Dorothy Shipp, and I insisted that membership in the Socialist Party was compatible with membership with Americans for Democratic Action. But they suspended all the socialists. So I went to Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, and I said, this is very undemocratic, and you have to do something about it. This is not the way democratic people operate, by suspending other people for their political views. So Eleanor Roosevelt, really, I unnerved her, I upset her, and she finally said to me, look, I don't care what you say. Americans for Democratic Action are my people, and I am not going to take the part of your people, which is the kind of philosophy that you never heard anyone mention about Eleanor Roosevelt. So she refused to intercede and restore the memberships of the people in the Young Socialist League. Well, ever since then, I became a real American radical, trying to make WBAI really effective and make it a voice for the voiceless, the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, a voice for the voiceless. But I don't know who told me this. I think Nat Wood, a very good producer, told me this. You know, people are not voiceless. The people we represent or we speak for are not voiceless. They have a good voice, but it's the responsibility of Josh and Joe Friendly and Harold Channer, Josh Walensky, to allow them to come and voice their opinions and their point of view. So that's what I've been trying to do since I've come to Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And I've spent a great deal of time even paying a lot of attention and time to Harold Channer's interruptions between speakers. You know, Everybody needs a voice, and they have to really share in this great media experiment that I am, and Lydia, and Harold are part of, and let's not forget Rosalie Grable.
Well.
After all, she's the web fairy,
Yeah.
you know, and she's
Yeah.
a
I can
wonderful,
vouch for Josh
wonderful person.
Valinsky's fearlessness.
And
Because
incidentally, there were no planes at 9/11. But let's discuss that
Well-
at some other time.
Well, maybe so, but yeah, well, and public access is really important because it's good to get around to communication. It's communication. And it's interesting, Dan was here not too long ago and he said there is Manhattan Neighborhood Network, one of the 3,000 public access facilities across the country, is the most prolific in terms of original programming of any broadcast facility in the world. So there are hundreds, thousands of people that relate to MNN beyond a few that we have here now. And public access as an institution is really very, very important and emerging so, particularly as all these cyber things go on. Much more so than I think it's been thought of over the long haul, where everybody wanted to be on NBC or some one of the established networks. It's more important than people think. So it's, yeah, I mean, Nat Wood, he did that with Tony Riddle. He said, you got a guy who's a great piano player, and the thing that the piano player needs more than anything else is a piano. So you got somebody who's got great talent, but they've got to have a way of communicating. And so public access is an important part of the communication system that's beginning to become more and more important. So, okay, we've all introduced. I wonder maybe we could just go into, I'm wondering, we got just about minutes left too on this tape. We're talking about things and we get a lot of conflict or James Joyce, the great poet, had a saying that I thought was really an interesting saying. He said, history, and if you take history, and I started off talking about that program that the History Channel put on, they said the history of the world, and they weren't talking just about the world of human history, they were talking about the existence of everything in the universe. And they were saying in 2 hours. And they went through with really good graphics right from the beginning of physics, Big Bang and so forth. And one wonders, are we still in a period, and so we understand now humanity evolved as a species about 200,000 years ago. We're all Africans. And we come to the end of 10,000 generations of human history. And are we coming at this, is there anything particularly special about this time against all of the generations of human existence that makes this time perhaps a jump up time, an end of time, a time when there might be the real emergence of real true justice? James Joyce said history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting to awaken. All of human history has been characteristic of particularly since the Neolithic and the building of empires and so forth, of a few people being in charge with everybody else being more or less like serfs. And it continues in a certain way politically now. And are we at a time of coming to the end of the human experience or not? Is this just another phase in history where we had the Enlightenment and then we had the steam engine, we had the United States, and we have the establishment of things? Or are we coming to a time of qualitative transformation in the time that we happen to be born in at various levels, including the youth? I'm of the opinion that this is the unique defining generation, and I wonder if anybody, I heard our guest say that, Barclay.
Harold, can I say one practical thing? Today I went down to Revolution Books, and when I got there, I found something happening, a terrible transformation. In other words, they cannot pay their rent.
Yeah, I know they're in trouble, yeah.
They were not open today.
Yeah.
In fact, I couldn't even find them. And then I looked around that neighborhood, which is at 5th Avenue right off 26th Street, 25th Street, and I saw all these new expensive buildings and all these so-called mama and papa stores completely gone. So I'll tell you that if the people in this society don't act now and stop these real estate banking bandits, we're not going to have a place to live, we're not going to have a place to earn a living, and we're not going to, many of us already have had to leave New York City. So if you want to call that some sort of a transformation, yes, it's a transformation perpetrated by the profiteers.
Well, all right, that'd be
And it's very scary.
That'd be a transformation that could lead to political instability, that could ultimately lead to the unleashing of the ungodly weapons which have reached finally since about 1970s species lethal capability, which is a new existential reality that is never applied. So that's a larger issue. We also have a capability, perhaps, of taking care of everybody in a way that we've never had before. So it's a two-eyed sword. We're coming to a point of qualitative trend. The thing is, this